Tonight, major reform to aged care held up in Canberra after months of talks. Hello, I'm Pamela Medlen. This is ABC News. Linda Reynolds launches fresh legal action against Brittany Higgins over millions of dollars held in a trust. Oprah revs up the crowd at the Democratic National Convention. And a major setback to the Dockers' finals hopes, with Sean Darcy ruled out of the last round clash with Port. The federal government insists it's on the cusp of unveiling major reforms to aged care. But with politicians departing Canberra for another 2 weeks, the sector's bitterly disappointed the new laws haven't been revealed. As the government prepares to ask older Australians to pay more for care, it's introduced laws to pay superannuation to mums and dads on paid parental leave.
Hey, show us your T-Rex face. Perfect.
The People's Parliament becomes a playground.
Oh, yeah.
The federal government introducing new laws to add super to government-funded paid parental leave from next July, a move Labor says will substantially help women when they retire.
Women shouldn't pay an additional financial penalty just because they're taking time out to do important work like this.
But much like being left hanging for a high five,
Knuckles, high fives.
the government is still yet to get an official sign-off from the opposition on a deal to reform aged care.
We'll have more to say about that subsequently.
There were areas that needed improvement and our Shadow Minister has done an outstanding job to date to seek some concessions.
The two sides have been in talks for months, striving for agreement behind closed doors to get older Australians to pay more for aged care.
Business as usual won't cut it in aged care in the coming decades.
The ABC understands there'll be no criminal penalties for providers who breach standards, and those who can afford it will pay more for residential and home care. But with the finer details still under wraps, the sector's concerned.
More could be a little bit, or it could be a lot. The uncertainty is going to cause anxiety.
The two major parties see bipartisanship on aged care as crucial to limit voter blowback. But nursing homes and those who represent older Australians are fed up with the delays. They'd been desperate for the new Aged Care Act to be introduced here in Parliament this past fortnight.
We now run the risk of not having enough time for older Australians to have their say in a Senate inquiry, or not getting it passed by the end of the year.
Changes are meant to be in effect mid-next year, and more than 3 years on from the Royal Commission, there's a sense older Australians have waited long enough. Evelyn Manfield, ABC News, Canberra.
Liberal Senator Linda Reynolds has launched fresh legal action against Brittany Higgins to try to access millions of dollars held in a trust as the defamation trial against her former staffer over several social media posts continues. A senior federal police officer told the defamation trial she was shocked Senator Reynolds called her to a meeting in the same room Ms Higgins had allegedly been raped in.
The legal strategy still on course, according to Senator Reynolds' lawyers.
Gone to plan. It's very hard. We're on day 15 and this case has gone to plan.
After weeks of witnesses for Senator Reynolds, the one and only witness for Miss Higgins' defence, Leanne Close, who was an AFP Deputy Commissioner at the time of Miss Higgins' alleged rape in 2019. She met with Senator Reynolds to discuss the incident in the then Minister's office. Ms Close told the court she was surprised and taken aback when Senator Reynolds told her the alleged rape took place on the couch in the office just behind them. She said she was thinking they were sitting in the middle of a potential crime scene that hadn't been forensically examined. Separately, Senator Reynolds has issued a new writ to break open a trust in which Ms Higgins had deposited $2.4 million from her settlement with the Commonwealth over the handling of her rape allegation. Senator Reynolds had, in an earlier ruling, won access to the details of the protective trust. In the writ, the former minister claims Ms Higgins transferred the funds into the trust with the intention of defeating or delaying creditors, such as herself. Senator Reynolds has now applied to have the transfer of funds voided and the money returned to Ms Higgins' regular bank accounts.
Seek to have what remains of the $2.4 million returned into the estate of Ms Higgins.
If Senator Reynolds is successful in having the money taken out of the trust, it could then be used to pay any damages if she wins the defamation trial. Nick Perpich, ABC News.
The Coalition has backed in a major overhaul to the federal government's National Disability Insurance Scheme, which passed Parliament today without support from the Greens. The changes are intended to slow the ballooning cost of the scheme. The bill is a major win for Labor, who managed to broker a deal with state and territory leaders and the Coalition after months of tension. Former NDIS Minister Linda Reynolds and her Liberal colleague Maria Kovacic both abstained from voting in the Senate, while the Greens accused the government of failing to consult the disability sector and described the projected savings as a betrayal to the community.
This has been a nervous time when you hear elements of your life discussed in Canberra. It can create a lot of anxiety. It wasn't that long ago that we didn't have an NDIS, and I think that, well, for me, we will never go back to that space, ever. The pathway forwards is with disabled people.
Australia will spend hundreds of millions of dollars towards building a new factory that will manufacture and service long-range strike missiles. The government has announced Norwegian defence company Kongsberg will soon produce its naval strike and joint strike missiles at the facility in Newcastle Airport Precinct. Last month, the Australian Navy successfully test-fired a naval strike missile for the first time.
This investment is about keeping Australians safe in an uncertain global environment, creating local jobs and supporting a future made in Australia.
The WA opposition is pushing for full transparency around an internal police investigation into the circumstances leading up to a double murder-suicide in Perth. Jennifer and Gretel Patelchis were shot dead in their Floreat home by Mark Bombara, who'd been looking for his estranged partner. He then turned the gun on himself. An investigation was undertaken after Ariel Bombara said she repeatedly warned police about her father and his guns before the shooting. The West Australian newspaper is reporting the review, which is ongoing, largely clears police of wrongdoing. The opposition's police spokesman, Peter Collier, says he's concerned some information wasn't included in the investigation.
I just want some answers, not for me, believe it or not for political capital, but to ensure transparency exists for the people of Western Australia, so that this never happens again. We never, ever, ever have a Jennifer and Gretel situation again.
A man has been remanded in custody accused of carjacking a vehicle with children in the back seat and evading authorities. Police say a woman was refuelling her car at a Shoalwater service station Tuesday night when a 42-year-old man allegedly jumped into the driver's seat. The accused started the engine with the woman's 2 children still inside the vehicle. She tried to help her children as the car drove away, with one child managing to escape. The accused stopped the car a short distance away and both the woman and the other child escaped unharmed. Police arrested the 42-year-old after a pursuit where the man crashed the stolen vehicle into a car and hid in the roof of a Middle Swan home. He'll remain in custody until returning to court in October. A West Australian parliamentary inquiry into the devastating forced adoption scandal of last century has recommended financial redress for mothers, adopted people and some fathers. If the government enacts the report's findings, WA would have the strongest compensation scheme in the country.
Behind each of these faces is a harrowing story.
No, I was 17. You don't know where your baby is, you haven't seen your baby. No one comes to visit you, no flowers.
I was 50 years old when I received a phone call to tell me that, along with my brother, I was also adopted.
I only found out 4 years ago that I was Aboriginal.
From the late 1930s to the early 80s, tens of thousands of babies were removed from their mainly unmarried young mothers. Now, in the WA Parliament, some recognition of their trauma.
Consent was not freely given because women were isolated, disempowered, pressured, coerced and threatened.
The landmark WA parliamentary inquiry received more than 200 submissions. Its final report makes 39 recommendations, including financial redress and specialised counselling for mothers, adopted people and some fathers.
I'm very pleased for the suggestion that he would like to see redress for adoptees.
It's just such an amazing feeling. I feel like everything that I've gone through has been worth it.
If all of the recommendations in this report are enacted, Western Australia will have the strongest compensation in the country for people affected by forced adoption. Victoria has the first redress scheme, but there only mothers are eligible.
Whatever we can do as a community to continue to support those mothers who have relinquished their children under very complex and difficult circumstances, I think we should take the opportunities to support them.
Survivors don't want to see the report gather dust.
We need to move quickly, otherwise people are not going to see justice in their lifetime, and they deserve justice after the cruelties they've experienced.
The government is expected to respond to the inquiry within 2 months. Rhiannon Shine, ABC News.
For people at risk of homelessness, a caravan or a bus can be the difference between having a roof over their head or sleeping rough. Changes to WA rules announced today will make it possible for people to stay in these so-called tiny homes for longer.
Good morning, Jam. Welcome to my home.
They say a person's home is their castle.
This is my kitchen area.
Darkin man Danny Reinhold took the battle to live in his to the top.
Just very comfortable.
And won.
People could buy a small block, do something like this, follow the rules, they get some security. Their children could have some security. They would feel better for themselves. This would be, it is a great way to go.
The pensioner's struggle with his local council to live in this bus has prompted the state government to change the rules.
Absolutely it did, and I was really happy to provide that approval for Danny, and I'm very pleased to see that it's made a real difference to him. My main aim is to take a compassionate approach as much as humanly possible.
Local governments will now be able to issue a permit to live in a caravan on private property for up to 2 years, with the minister imposing a 9-week deadline for council approvals.
The Local Government Association has welcomed today's changes, saying it'll help alleviate the housing shortage, particularly in regional WA.
This is about making sure that everyone has somewhere to live, and if it happens to be a tiny home on wheels, and for many people, a tiny home on wheels is, for them, it would be their castle.
The new rules also open up opportunities for landholders to use portable homes as short-stay accommodation.
A very comfortable little sanctuary for our guests to come and stay.
While holidaymakers will also be able to camp on private property without a permit for up to 5 days instead of 3. Samantha Girling, ABC News, Albany.
Coming up on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson, the public housing allegedly left neglected by the state and the people with nowhere to go.
I feel that I've been ignored and forgotten. They haven't done anything for my house.
Don't have a roof over your head?
Nothing, yeah.
I'm paying rent for the termites that live here.
Every house that we went into had a significant number of problems.
If I was a tenant in the city, those maintenance requests will be done like that.
A man has been arrested after he forced open an emergency exit door of a Jetstar plane moments after it landed at Melbourne Airport this morning. Jetstar says the plane had landed from Sydney about 10 a.m. and was at the gate when a man opened the emergency exit door, automatically deploying the emergency slide. He then walked onto the wing of the plane and slid down the engine. The man was detained on the tarmac by staff before he was arrested by Australian Federal Police officers. He'll be charged at a later date. One of the passengers says the man displayed erratic behaviour before he ran down the aisle towards the emergency row.
I think as soon as we heard people screaming and shrieking, the urgency of it all was really rattling, and we just gripped each other's hands. You know, we were shaking, really terrified.
Fertility service Monash IVF has agreed to pay out more than $50 million in a class action settlement brought by more than 700 patients. It was accused of using inaccurate genetic testing and destroying potentially viable embryos. Lawyers for the women affected say the company's mistakes led their clients to make life-altering decisions.
5 years ago, Danielle Bopping wanted to grow her own family. She turned to IVF, but says her dreams for a child were dashed.
We don't choose to do IVF unless we have to, and we have no choice but to trust the medical professionals.
Miss Bopping gave her last remaining embryo to Monash IVF for testing, but the results showed the embryo wasn't viable. It later emerged the company's new non-invasive testing method was inaccurate, and a decision to discard the embryo may have been a tragic mistake.
I was angry, I was hurt, I was confused. I just kept questioning, like, how could this happen?
Miss Bopping wasn't the only one, and more than 700 women from around the country took the company to court. Today, it agreed to a $56 million settlement.
This has had real, lasting, devastating impacts on people's mental health.
The women also alleged Monash IVF destroyed embryos without consent, that signatures had been forged, and that one scientist burned documents.
It is not okay in the name of scientific innovation to use clients, paying clients and patients as guinea pigs.
As part of its settlement, Monash IVF has made no admissions of liability. In a statement it said, "We acknowledge this case has been challenging for many people and we regret any distress or hurt that may have been experienced." The company has stopped using the embryo testing method at the centre of the case. The next step is for the Supreme Court to approve the settlement, and that could be a complicated process given the amount of money and people involved. And deductions will also need to be made for legal fees.
There is a sense of closure, although it can never take away the pain and the trauma that so many of us have felt, but that hopefully it allows us to move forward.
Christian Silva, ABC News.
American TV icon Oprah Winfrey has made another intervention into US politics, appearing at the Democratic National Convention in support of Kamala Harris. The star-studded third day also saw running mate Tim Walz formally accept the party's vice presidential nomination.
Returning to the city where she made her name.
Let's all choose Kamala Harris!
Oprah Winfrey made a surprise appearance in Chicago to give the Vice President a high-profile boost.
We won't be set back, pushed back, bullied back, kicked back. We're not going back.
The celebrity cameos piled up on day 3 of the convention, with performances from John Legend and Stevie Wonder.
Are y'all ready? We must choose courage over complacency.
While a former president with star power sought to contrast his party's candidate with her opponent, Donald Trump.
Kamala Harris for the people. The other guy who's proved, even more than the first go-around, that he's about me, myself, and I.
But the night belonged to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz.
It's the honor of my life to accept your nomination for Vice President of the United States.
The former schoolteacher and football coach catapulted onto the national stage as Kamala Harris's running mate.
We're driving down the field. And boy, do we have the right team.
Just a few weeks ago, there wouldn't have been too many Americans outside Minnesota who knew anything about Tim Walz. This was his biggest opportunity yet to introduce himself to the public and try to convince voters to back the Harris-Walz ticket.
Honestly, he reminds us of our dads.
Shows humility, thoughtfulness, and a caring for human beings.
The party faithful has bought the sales pitch, but Tim Walz and Kamala Harris will need broader support if they're going to win.
Jade McMillan, ABC News, Chicago.
Communities in southern Israel that were devastated during the October 7 Hamas attack plan to boycott a government memorial marking the first anniversary. Many residents of the small border towns say they felt abandoned during and following the attack and will hold their own ceremonies instead. They've also accused the government of dragging its feet in ceasefire talks.
On the Gaza border, a respected grandfather and friend is lowered into the ground next to his son. Avraham Munda was captured alive by Hamas militants on October 7, along with his wife, daughter and 9-year-old grandson. Those relatives were released after nearly 50 days in captivity, but Mr. Munda was left behind.
Dear father, you recovered from your injuries from the kidnapping, but were abandoned again and again by the Prime Minister.
Avraham Munda was one of 6 Israeli hostages whose remains were recovered by the military from the Gazan city of Khan Yunis this week. It's likely at least one was killed by Israeli fire. Family and friends of the hostages say their government has failed them.
He would be here alive, wounded but alive.
I don't believe that they really want to bring them back.
Hamas is still believed to be holding 109 hostages. Israeli authorities estimate at least a third of them are dead.
It was here on the Gaza border that communities bore the brunt of the October the 7th attacks. Now their residents say they're going to boycott a planned government memorial service. They'd prefer the government spent its energy trying to save the hostages who are still inside Gaza rather than memorialising the events of that day.
In Gaza, the Palestinian Health Ministry says at least 50 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes over a 24-hour period. The Israeli military issued new evacuation orders, forcing Palestinians to move yet again. Waiting for a ceasefire, their misery made worse by successive displacements and disappointments. Eric Dworchak, ABC News on the Gaza border.
Ukraine is bolstering its forces in the east of the country as it works to repel a Russian advance in the Donetsk region. Kiev has released vision of its military carrying out artillery strikes on Russian troops near the city of Pokrovsk, a key logistics hub for Ukraine. The military says it repelled 44 attacks in the region, resulting in more than 200 Russian casualties. Local authorities have ordered residents in nearby towns and villages to evacuate. Police in Romania have raided 4 properties connected with controversial influencer Andrew Tate amid allegations of his involvement with minors. The self-described misogynist was taken into police custody and remanded overnight. The raid on Tate's homes is part of a new probe into crimes including trafficking of minors, sex with a minor and money laundering. The dual British-American, who has millions of followers, is already awaiting trial on charges of human trafficking, rape and forming a criminal gang to sexually exploit women. To finance now, and the local share market rose for the 10th day in a row today. Here's Alan Kohler.
Well, the winning streak is now 10 days old. Now, I don't know how many times that has happened in history, but it's not many. There was a 12-dayer in February 2016, so it's the first since then. But as this 30-day graph of the All Ordinaries Index shows, despite rising for 10 days in a row, it hasn't yet regained the record high reached at 1:30 p.m. on August the 1st. Today's rise was driven by some of the banks, tech stocks including WiseTech Global continuing its huge run, and mining stocks, because the iron ore prices stopped falling. In fact, it stopped falling the day after the government put out a statement saying it was falling, which was clearly a buy signal. Copper also rose while oil and gold fell. The US dollar went up a bit last night ahead of the speech by Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell at the Jackson Hole Symposium of Central Bankers that starts tonight, and the Aussie held firm at 67.4 US cents. The market is now expecting 4 US rate cuts by Christmas, with the Fed funds rate expected to come down by 1%. Any hint from the Fed chairman that that's not going to happen will be 6.5 on the Richter scale. If it does happen and the Reserve Bank of Australia keeps talking and acting tough, then the Aussie dollar is heading higher. And finally, the American share market fell yesterday, so its streak was a measly 9, but it did go back up last night, taking Tokyo and Hong Kong with it. And that's finance.
Communications Minister Michelle Rowland has thanked outgoing ABC Managing Director David Anderson after he announced he'll be resigning from the public broadcaster. Mr Anderson will stay on in the role until a new Managing Director is appointed, possibly early next year. Chairman Kim Williams says the ABC has been a better place under Mr Anderson's leadership. All up, David Anderson has spent more than 3 decades at the ABC, nearly 6 years in his current role as MD. Mr Anderson said the decision to leave was not an easy one, and he's still very much committed to the importance of the ABC to the nation.
Our journalists, our commitment to telling Australian stories, our commitment across regional, rural, remote Australia and increasing our numbers there. For everything that we've done over those 6 years, I'm quite proud of what the ABC's achieved.
Fremantle is set to fight for its season without ruck Sean Darcy after the big man was ruled out for a 3rd week with injury. The Dockers' finals hopes rest on other results before the bounce on Sunday against Port Adelaide. But coach Justin Longmuir says that won't change his side's approach.
A nervous weekend awaits the Dockers. At least one result needs to go their way before they face Port Adelaide on Sunday afternoon. The players left to decide if they watch those matches.
I mean, if their process is to sit down and watch the footy, keep doing it. But if it's not, well, don't get drawn into it. I think our process has allowed us to be in most games this year and allowed us to put a pretty consistent level of footy out there.
Fremantle will again be without forward Josh Tracy and ruck Sean Darcy. The Dockers not willing to take a punt on Darcy's fitness.
We're happy with the way Reedy went last week, and yeah, it's just for the stability of the team. I think that's probably the best thing. Yeah, and Sean and the individuals involved.
But they could bring back Michael Walters, Neil Erasmus and James Aish, who have been added to the extended squad. Port will be without defender Dan Houston for the clash and the rest of the AFL season after the AFL Appeals Board upheld his 5-match ban for this bump on Adelaide's Isaac Rankin. West Coast is limping towards the end of another disappointing campaign, but there is a silver lining. Red Bazzo will play his first AFL game in more than a year following a groin injury.
He's had great support around him from the football club. I know externally he has as well. But yeah, his mental resilience and just I think it just shows a lot about his character to keep pushing forward, and and we want to see him bear the fruits of that.
The Eagles face the high-flying Geelong at Cardinia Park, a venue the club hasn't won at since 2006. West Coast has made 5 changes. Bazzo joined by Ryan Marrick, Clay Hall, Campbell Chesser and Jack Hutchinson for Saturday's clash. Tom Wildey, ABC News.
One of the world's rarest penguins, likely hailing from the South Atlantic Ocean, has washed up on Perth's shores and been saved by locals. Little endangered Pascal is settling into her new home at Perth Zoo, and she's booked in for a long-term stay. The northern rockhopper penguin can't be released back into the wild, with vets citing arrested molting, poor environmental conditions and a lack of nutrition. Zoo staff said they're smitten with Pascal, who passes the time honking loudly at passing visitors. Now to the weather, and we're in for some more windy and showery conditions this evening. First, a look at the temperatures from today. Right now in town it's 19 degrees and humidity is 65%. Perth's minimum was 13.2 degrees around 4 o'clock this morning, rising to a top of 21.6 just before 2 p.m. The state's coldest spot was Ayr, which recorded a freezing -1 degree, while in the north the state's highest maximum was 39 at Fitzroy Crossing, which is about 6 degrees warmer than its average for the month. To the satellite, a low-pressure system passing through the state's southwest is bringing thick cloud to the region and producing strong northwesterly winds over the south and lower west, which can also expect some decent falls tonight and into tomorrow morning. And that system will be followed by a strong cold front, which will move over southern parts of the state on Saturday, bringing widespread falls, gusty thunderstorms and possible damaging winds. A quick look around the country tomorrow. Rain developing in Melbourne, a shower or two for Adelaide and Hobart. Partly cloudy and 26 in Brisbane, and mostly sunny conditions and 22 for Sydney. Back to WA's north, and it's continuing to warm up with more tops in the high 30s across the Kimberley. Some cloud and showers around for western parts of the Pilbara and over the Gascoyne. Central parts of the state could see around 1 to 10 millimetres of rainfall, but otherwise looking partly cloudy with milder conditions and tops in the low 20s. In the south, it will be pretty windy tomorrow with a chance of gusty thunderstorms across the southwest and along the coast. Some towns could pick up around 20 millimetres. Meanwhile, Perth could see up to 15 mils with a chance of a thunderstorm about the southern suburbs. The city is forecast to reach a top of 20 degrees from an overnight low of 13. Sunrise will be at 6:44, setting at 5 minutes to 6. Looking ahead, another big downpour on Saturday with up to 25 millimetres possible, easing on Sunday, then light showers continuing into next week with tops in the low 20s. And that's ABC News for now. I'll be back with you tomorrow, but stay with us now for 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson.